Hey Wargamers, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios. Today I'm going to be painting Marvel's Colossus from Night Models. This is part one of a three-part series, and in this video I'm going to be painting specifically the metallic parts of Colossus using a non-metallic chrome sort of method I like to call comic book chrome. In this entire video I'm only going to be using two colors of paint, which is black and white. In this case I've chosen to use P3 Thamar Black and Moro White. I'm applying a generous amount of each to my wet palette because I'm going to be mixing them back and forth a little bit to get some interim grays, but mostly I'm going to be working with pure black and pure white. So I'm going to demonstrate the entire technique on his left leg, and then I'm going to skip ahead and paint his face. It's a really repetitive task painting his other leg and his two arms, so I'm only going to demonstrate one leg, basically the thigh here, and then I'm going to show his face because it's a very different process. But to begin any of it, it needs to be base coated black first, so I'm going to go ahead and just do that now. With the P3 Thamar Black, it can be a little bit on the thin side, and normally that's a quality that's really good, except when you're base coating, so it may take 2-3 coats to get a good base coat here. You could conceivably also just prime this model black and not do a white or a zenithal prime like I've done here. I've done that specifically because it does make the model show up a lot better on video. And when I paint the other aspects of this miniature, zenithal priming makes it a lot easier to find the different folds and muscle groupings and so on. So with the black base coat down, I've now switched over to pure white. I'm just going to paint in some very stark top highlights on each of the muscle groups. So it's basically on the upward facing curve of each muscle, and just running along that curve all the way down, even if it doesn't really make sense from a light sourcing sort of standpoint. Because we are going with a comic book sort of look here, which is, especially when you look back at the 90s X-Men comics or the 90s X-Men cartoons as a reference point, almost all their medals were drawn with just black and just white. And it was just these really extreme linear details, and they just sort of outlined the areas, and the rest of the medal was just left pure black. And so I really want to evoke that 1990s X-Men comic feel with this painting. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just painting very sharp, almost linear highlights. I'm just slightly fading the back edge of the white highlight as it overlaps the black areas. So you can see there's a little bit of gray in between the two, but it's almost just a pure two-tone paint job at this point. Now I'm mixing up a little bit of gray just to feather the transitions just slightly, just so it's not a really sharp, distinct step from white to black. And now I've brought just a little bit more black into the gray so it feathers even nicer over to the black, especially on these larger areas. With all the basic block highlights in place, it's time to just start accenting all that metal banding that kind of makes Colossus look really distinct. And all I'm doing for that is a little bit of straight white very thinly across the top of each of the bands. Now I'm using straight white here closest to where I've already painted the white highlight, and only bringing it out maybe halfway across the muscle group. I'll come back in a little bit later with a gray and carry that out just a little bit further. If you want to be really adventurous, or if you've got really fantastic brush control and just nothing to do with your free time, you can also overline each of these white lines with a tiny little bit of black, so that there's basically an inferred shadow of the band above it. It's really, really not necessary for the look. The fact that the white is so much brighter than the surrounding colors already kind of sells it. But if you want to take it just a little step further, if you want to really just push your skill, go ahead, and it does make the model look even a little bit better. It's just not really necessary to get the look and feel I want here. So now I've got the front of the thigh done. I'm going to continue doing the same technique across the back, adding the white block highlights first, doing a little bit of feathering, and then painting in the banding. There's a few areas I wanted to tone down a little bit, so I'm taking some water from the edge of my wet palette and just adding a tiny bit of Thamar Black into it to make a black glaze, and I'm just very lightly applying that over a few areas of the thigh. And now it's time to paint the tiny little band lines again. Now, on occasion, some of these lines are missing from the model, either because I had to file away a mold line and it kind of took some of the detail with it, or just because it wasn't a really deep detail in the first place and priming or base coating ended up filling it in, or at least making it really hard to see. When that happens, you can just freehand on the line, give a best guess as to where it is. They're basically evenly placed, so it's pretty easy to tell where a band that might be missing should lie. And you can just paint it in as if it was there. And unless someone's really squinting and looking really, really closely at your model, they're not going to really know the difference between the two. Alright, with that, Colossus's left thigh is done. As I mentioned, I'm going to skip his other leg and his arms. I'm going to paint them now, but you're not going to see that on video. And then I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how I paint his face. So I began off camera by just base coating his entire head with Thamar Black. Before I do anything else, I want to get his eyes painted. So to do that, I'm going to use just a little bit of pure white and do my best to specifically paint his eyes, but understand that I know I'm probably going to make a little mistake and go a little bit outside the area where his eyes are. And because nothing else has been painted yet aside from his eyes, I can just bring in a little more Thamar Black and reshape the eyes until they look correct and until they look balanced. You don't want one at a different angle than the other. So once the eyes are where I want them to be, I'm going to start painting highlights on each of his cheeks, which is basically just a horizontal line under the eye. And a small line above his upper lip below the nose. With the face, I'm going to be roughing in every single detail just in white first before I worry about any transitions. And I'm going to get a small highlight on his chin. I also want to brighten up the tip of his nose to make sure that's a prominent detail. And because it is actually a fairly large nose, I want to make sure I look at it from the sides and that I get the nostrils as well. Here I'm highlighting the edge of his hair. This isn't really necessary at this point, except that it helps me kind of proportion other parts of his face while I'm looking at them. Next up, I'm doing a white line across the left side of his forehead and brightening up his left cheek a little bit further and carrying it just a little around the side of the head. To help give Colossus a bit of a squinty, scowling look, I'm painting between his eyebrows separately, so that it gives the impression there's kind of a dark furrow to each side of it. Now it's time to catch up on the right side of his face. I'm going to start painting his right forehead and his right cheek. Each cheek is basically a triangle with the horizontal part being right underneath the eye and then pointing downwards towards the chin. Also using a bright white line to bring out the nasolabial fold on each side of his face. Drawing attention to this just kind of lends the illusion of strength to his face. There's something very defined and chiseled about it. And then, because it runs really close to the line that highlights the upper lip, I want to join that together as well. Now I'm highlighting his eyebrows so they just stand out a little more compared to the rest of his forehead. So you can see now that his facial details are really coming together. It's very defined and very obviously a face. And this would be a perfect place to stop if you just want to get this model on the table quickly. Next up, I'm highlighting his jawline across each side to just make it have a little more illusion of strength and angle. By highlighting it, it makes it appear to protrude a little more than it really does, and that there isn't a shadow cast on it from his cheeks. And of course, Colossus does have tiny little ears, and we can't forget to paint those. Now I'm going to finish framing the face by highlighting his hairline and just seeing where everything lies. So now I'm mixing up a little bit of gray just to do some interim blending, because there's a few areas, especially around the cheeks, where there are a little bit larger details, and I want to just smooth the black and white transitions. I'm also going to do the same thing across his forehead, where there's a very sharp black line between the highlight across the top of his forehead and his eyebrows, and I kind of want to bring that together just a little bit. While I've got the gray handy, I'm going to paint the top of his haircut, which is basically a 90s style flat top haircut. I'm leaving it a little bit more black towards the back and brightening it up towards the front as it hits that white highlight I've already painted. And of course, a few little white highlights for his sideburns. Now I'm just doing one last pass of the head, bringing in a little bit of pure Moro white to a couple areas that maybe got dimmed a little bit by the gray paint earlier, or just I want to stand out just a little bit further with one extra coat of white. That's pretty much just going to be his eyebrows and cheeks, to be honest. Alright, and that's all there is to it. Colossus's metallic details are all done using nothing but pure black and pure white paint here. I'm going to be perfectly honest, I didn't do a trial run of this technique at all, and I was a little intimidated when I started out, especially because I was doing this on a live stream, but it turned out fantastic, and I think really anyone with a little bit of effort and some patience can pull this off. In the next video, I'm going to be painting the red aspects of Colossus's costume. Until then, keep on painting and do something epic. Thanks for watching.